The studio buzzed with anticipation as the crowd settled in, eyes locked on the grand stage where one of the most anticipated interviews of the year was about to unfold. Keanu Reeves, beloved by millions for his humility and kindness, was set to appear on the Savannah Cross show. But this wasn't just any interview. This was Savannah Cross, the host known for her ruthless interrogations, someone who thrived on breaking her guests down in front of a live audience. Backstage, producers whispered amongst themselves, "She's going for the kill tonight," one muttered. Another shook his head. "Keanu won't see it coming." The cameras rolled, the lights flared, and the show's dramatic opening music played. Savannah Cross, poised and predatory, adjusted her stack of cue cards with a knowing smirk. She had taken down politicians, A-list actors, and CEOs. Tonight would be no different. Her plan was simple. Strip away the Hollywood mystique, expose the man behind the legend, and leave Keanu scrambling for answers. Then he entered. Dressed in his signature understated style, a black blazer, faded jeans, and an effortless air of calm, Keanu Reeves strode onto the stage. The audience erupted into cheers, holding up signs that read, "We love you, Keanu." But Savannah didn't flinch. She let the applause wash over her, waiting. As Keanu settled into his chair, Savannah leaned in slightly, her piercing gaze locked onto him. "Keanu," she began, her voice smooth but laced with challenge, "you could live like a king, yet you choose a simple life. Do you really think that changes anything?" The trap was set. The audience fell silent, but what Savannah didn't realize was that she wasn't the one in control. Not tonight. A hush fell over the studio. The weight of Savannah's question hung in the air, her words carefully crafted to put Keanu on the defensive. This was her moment to corner him, to expose the contradiction in his humility. But Keanu didn't blink. He sat back, his expression unreadable, fingers loosely interlaced as if considering the weight of her words. Then, with his signature calm, he spoke. "Savannah," he said softly, his voice carrying across the silent room, "have you ever thought about how many people feel invisible every day?" A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. The question was unexpected, not the direct response Savannah had anticipated. Her smile faltered for just a second before she quickly regained her composure. "That's a noble sentiment," she countered, her tone sharp. "But let's be honest, riding the subway and giving away money doesn't erase the fact that you're one of the most privileged men in the world. Aren't you just playing at being humble?" The words cut through the air like a blade, designed to provoke, to shake his carefully maintained demeanor. But Keanu remained unfazed. He let the question settle, let the tension in the room deepen before responding. "Humility isn't something you play at, Savannah," he said. "It's something you live. And if my actions can remind just one person that they are seen, that they matter, then yes, it makes a difference." The audience shifted in their seats. Some nodded in agreement, others whispered amongst themselves. The energy in the room had changed. Savannah narrowed her eyes slightly. He wasn't taking the bait, but she wasn't done yet. She had one question left in her arsenal, a personal strike she was certain would break him. She leaned forward, her voice lowering into something almost intimate but laced with cruelty. "You talk about making a difference," she said, her words slow and deliberate, "but what about when life takes everything from you? You lost your fiancé, your child, your best friend. Did that humility help you then?" A sharp intake of breath rippled through the audience. The mood had shifted from intrigue to something heavier. Keanu's fingers curled slightly against his knee. For the first time, silence stretched between them. The air in the studio turned ice cold. Savannah's words had sliced through the room, leaving a weight that no one dared to break. The audience sat frozen, their gazes flicking between Keanu and the host, waiting to see if this would be the moment he finally faltered. Keanu remained silent. His fingers tightened slightly against his knee, but his face gave nothing away. The camera zoomed in, capturing the quiet storm in his eyes, a depth of pain that couldn't be manufactured, a weight that was all too real. Savannah leaned in, sensing weakness. She had spent years perfecting this digging, into wounds, exposing raw emotion for the sake of television, and now she had him exactly where she wanted. "Didn't that destroy you?" she pressed, her voice softer now, almost sympathetic, but everyone could hear the calculated sharpness beneath. "Don't you ever feel that in the end, everything is just pain?" The silence stretched. Some members of the audience glanced away, uncomfortable. Others watched with bated breath, expecting Keanu to break. Instead, he lifted his gaze, and when he spoke, it wasn't anger that filled his voice, it was something deeper. "No," Keanu said, his voice quiet but unwavering, "pain never destroyed me." Savannah blinked. That wasn't the answer she expected. Keanu continued, his words deliberate. "Pain taught me. It showed me that nothing in life is permanent, that love, real love, never disappears, even when the person you love is gone." A single tear slipped down a woman's cheek in the front row. A man near the back swallowed hard, his expression unreadable. Savannah's fingers tightened around her cue cards. She hadn't expected this. She had thought she could break him, force him into a moment of weakness. Instead, he had taken her question and turned it into something else entirely, something powerful, something untouchable. For the first time in her career, Savannah Cross felt herself losing control of the interview. And she hated it. She straightened in her seat, her eyes flashing with determination. If this angle wouldn't shake him, she would go deeper, sharper, crueler. She flipped to her next card. Keanu might have withstood this blow, but she still had one last trick up her sleeve. The silence in the studio was suffocating. Savannah Cross had played her hand, and lost. Keanu Reeves had turned her calculated jab into a moment of undeniable truth, leaving the audience hanging onto his every word. But Savannah wasn't done. She adjusted her posture, forcing a tight-lipped smile. She had to regain control. If emotion couldn't crack him, then logic would. She flipped to her next question card, her fingers tightening around the edges. She exhaled slowly, then spoke, her voice carrying a new, cutting precision. "You've built a career on being Hollywood's good guy, the humble star, the one who gives back, who stays grounded." She tilted her head, eyes gleaming with something just short of cruelty. "But let's be honest, Keanu. Hollywood doesn't care about kindness, it cares about relevance." Keanu remained still, but a flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Savannah seized the moment. "You're over 50 now, your time as a leading man is running out. Hollywood replaces its stars like worn-out props. Doesn't that scare you? Don't you fear becoming irrelevant?" A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Some whispered, shocked at her bluntness. Others leaned forward, waiting for Keanu's response. He didn't rush. He sat there, letting the question linger in the air like he was measuring the weight of his own mortality. Then he smiled. It wasn't smug, it wasn't defensive, it was something else entirely. Serene. Knowing. "Savannah," he said, his voice like quiet thunder. "Have you ever seen a sunset?" The question caught her off guard. She blinked. "What?" Keanu leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "A sunset is beautiful, isn't it? But have you ever heard someone call it irrelevant just because the night is coming?" The room fell silent. Then applause erupted, spontaneous, unstoppable. Savannah's lips parted, as if searching for a response, but for the first time she had none. Keanu had taken her trap and turned it into a moment of absolute victory. And Savannah Cross, who had built her career on tearing people down, was the one left scrambling. Savannah Cross felt the shift. The interview had started as a calculated takedown, but Keanu Reeves had turned every pointed question into something profound, The audience was no longer entertained by her usual game of verbal chess. They were moved. But Savannah wasn't ready to surrender. Her grip tightened on the cue cards as she flipped to a new one. If she couldn't break him with Hollywood, she'd attack something deeper. His past. She leaned forward, her voice sharp yet deceptively smooth. "Keanu, you grew up without a father," she began, watching his reaction carefully. "Your mother worked multiple jobs to raise you. You never had stability, never had a role model." She let the words hang, then delivered her strike. "Didn't that make you angry? Didn't that make you bitter?" The audience stiffened. This was personal. For the first time, Keanu's expression darkened, not in anger but in something deeper, more reflective. He looked away, his fingers lightly interlacing as he let the question settle. Then he spoke, calm, deliberate. "My father taught me something very valuable, Savannah." The journalist blinked. This wasn't the response she expected. Keanu turned back to her, his eyes steady. "He taught me exactly the kind of man I never wanted to become." A hush fell over the room. "My mother," his voice softened, "she taught me how to survive." A woman in the audience let out a quiet sob. The weight of his words hit harder than any attack Savannah had planned. Savannah opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She had expected resentment, pain. Instead, Keanu Reeves had turned his past into strength. She glanced down at her cue cards, flipping them absent-mindedly. The strategy wasn't working. She had tried to expose his wounds, but all she had done was reveal his resilience. And for the first time in her career, Savannah Cross wasn't sure how to continue. Savannah Cross clenched her jaw. The interview was slipping through her fingers like sand. Every question, every provocation, Keanu Reeves had dismantled them with quiet strength. She was losing control, and she knew it. But she wasn't finished. If his past couldn't shake him, she would force him to confront his future. She straightened her blazer, flipping to the next cue card. This time, her voice was quieter, colder. "Keanu," she said, leaning in slightly, "you're over 50 now. Hollywood doesn't care about actors your age anymore." A few murmurs rippled through the audience. Some shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the bluntness of the question. Savannah didn't care. "Don't you fear becoming irrelevant?" A beat of silence. Keanu didn't react immediately. Instead, he sat there, calm, unshaken. His fingers tapped lightly against each other as if considering her words, not as an attack, but as a curiosity. Then, he lifted his gaze. "Savannah," he said softly, "have you ever watched a sunset?" She blinked. This wasn't the response she was expecting. Keanu continued, his voice even. "A sunset is beautiful, isn't it? But have you ever heard anyone call it irrelevant just because the night is coming?" The audience erupted into applause. Shouts of support filled the room. Savannah froze. She had spent her career pushing people into corners, leaving them flustered and exposed. But Keanu wasn't playing her game. Her carefully crafted narrative, the idea that Hollywood determined a person's worth, had just been shattered in one simple, poetic response. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The power dynamic had shifted. She had walked into this interview believing she was the one in control. Now, for the first time, she realized she was the one being exposed. The cue cards trembled slightly in her grip. She needed to regain control fast. And there was still one final card she could play. She flipped to the next question, knowing that this would be her last chance to break him. If Keanu didn't fear irrelevance, she would force him to face something even darker, his own mortality. Savannah Cross inhaled sharply, her fingers tightening around the cue cards. Keanu Reeves had just turned her question on irrelevance into something poetic, leaving her exposed instead. The audience was no longer on her side. She could feel the shift. The power she once held was slipping. But she wasn't done yet. She flipped to the next card, her voice lowering into something colder, sharper. "Keanu," she said, measuring every word, "you've lived through loss, you've endured pain, but let's be real. Time waits for no one." She leaned in slightly, her gaze piercing. "You've spent your life inspiring people, but have you ever thought about what happens when you're gone?" The air in the studio froze. The audience barely breathed. This wasn't just a tough question, it was a deliberate strike, designed to force him into a moment of raw vulnerability. Keanu didn't react. Not at first. He didn't flinch, didn't shift uncomfortably like so many others had under Savannah's interrogation. Instead, he was silent. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then he smiled, a soft, almost knowing smile. "The question isn't what they'll remember about me," he said gently. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then his gaze locked onto hers. "The question is, what will they remember about you?" A visible shiver rippled through the audience. Savannah's expression faltered. For the first time, she looked truly unsettled. She had built her career exposing others. Now she was the one exposed. Her fingers twitched over the cue cards, but suddenly they felt useless. Because for the first time, Savannah Cross didn't know what to say. Savannah Cross sat frozen. For the first time in her career, she had no words. Keanu Reeves' response hung in the air, heavier than any scripted moment she had ever orchestrated. It wasn't just an answer. It was a mirror turned back on her. The audience was still, their eyes shifting between the two, waiting, watching, to see how she would recover. Savannah's fingers twitched, her polished exterior showing the first signs of cracking. She had come prepared to challenge him, to push him into a corner where he would have no choice but to reveal something raw and unfiltered. But now she was the one being unraveled. Her breath was tight, but she forced herself to keep her composure. She couldn't let this slip. She was Savannah Cross, a journalist who had built an empire by dismantling the defenses of the world's most powerful figures. She swallowed hard and reached for one last lifeline. Her voice, when it finally returned, was softer than before but still carried an edge. "That's a profound response, Keanu," she said, her fingers tightening around the cue cards. "But let's be honest, memories fade, legacies disappear. You can inspire people, but at the end of the day, doesn't death erase us all?" A quiet gasp rippled through the crowd. Keanu didn't blink. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice calm but piercing. "No," he said simply. Savannah's lips parted slightly. Keanu tilted his head. "Love doesn't disappear," he continued. "The people we touch, the kindness we give, that stays, even when we're gone." The audience felt those words. But more importantly, Savannah did too. And for the first time, she didn't want to ask the next question. Savannah Cross was losing control, and she knew it. She had spent years crafting the perfect on-air persona, calm, unshakable, always in command. But now, in front of a live audience and millions watching at home, she was the one being deconstructed. Keanu's words had done something no guest ever had before. They had stopped her. The weight of his answer still lingered in the room. Love doesn't disappear. The people we touch, the kindness we give, that stays. It wasn't just a response, it was an undeniable truth. For a moment, Savannah hesitated. She glanced down at her cue cards, her safety net, her weapons. She had one last question, one final attempt to regain control. But suddenly, the words on the cards felt hollow. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted her eyes to Keanu, who sat there, unshaken, watching her. Not with smugness, not with defiance, but with something far worse. Understanding. Savannah swallowed. She couldn't hesitate now. She inhaled sharply and delivered her final blow. "You speak about love, about kindness, But what happens when the world forgets you? What if one day everything you've done, everything you've said, is erased? The audience held their breath. Keanu's gaze didn't waver. He studied her, then spoke with absolute certainty. If I lived only to be remembered, I would have wasted my time. Silence. Savannah blinked. She wasn't expecting that. Keanu leaned in slightly. We don't live for legacy, Savannah. We live for the moments we create, for the people we love, and that is enough. Savannah's throat tightened, because for the first time she realized maybe she had been asking the wrong questions all along. The silence that followed Keanu's words was unlike anything the studio had ever experienced. No murmurs, no whispers, just a heavy, undeniable realization settling over the room. Savannah Cross, the relentless interviewer, the woman who thrived on control, had no response. Keanu's words still echoed in the air. We don't live for legacy. We live for the moments we create, for the people we love, and that is enough. Her fingers twitched slightly over her cue cards, the remnants of a battle she had already lost. She could feel the cameras still rolling, the audience watching her, waiting. But for the first time in her career, Savannah Cross wasn't thinking about the audience. She was thinking about herself. Her carefully curated world of sharp questions and exposed vulnerabilities suddenly felt hollow. She had spent years dismantling people's public facades, stripping them down, demanding the truth. But now she had to ask herself, what truth had she been running from? A single breath, a single moment, and then the unexpected happened. A tear slipped down her cheek. She blinked quickly as if trying to suppress it. But it was too late. The camera caught everything. The audience, once tense and expectant, softened. No one was laughing, no one was sneering, because they weren't just watching an interview anymore. They were witnessing something real. Keanu Reeves hadn't just answered her questions. He had made her question everything. The interview was over, but Savannah Cross knew. This moment would never leave her. In a world obsessed with control, perception, and legacy, Keanu Reeves' responses in the interview offer valuable lessons on how to navigate life with resilience, wisdom, and authenticity. His approach to the sharpest questions and personal attacks teaches us several important truths we can apply in our daily lives. Stay calm in the face of provocation. When confronted with negativity, hostility, or manipulation, don't react emotionally. Instead, remain composed. People who try to shake you are often looking for an emotional response. Denying them that power makes you unshakable. Redirect the conversation with thoughtful questions. Keanu didn't argue or defend himself aggressively. He turned the conversation around. By asking deeper questions, he forced Savannah Cross to confront her own intentions. In life, when someone tries to put you on the spot, ask them a question that forces reflection. It shifts the power dynamic instantly. Pain is a teacher, not a weakness. When Savannah attacked Keanu's past losses, he didn't break. Instead, he reframed pain as something that taught him, shaped him, but never destroyed him. In our own struggles, we should remember, pain is inevitable, but how we use it defines us. Legacy is overrated. Moments matter more. Keanu's final response, we don't live for legacy. We live for the moments we create, for the people we love, is a crucial reminder that true fulfillment doesn't come from fame, money, or being remembered. It comes from how we treat people, the love we give, and the kindness we leave behind. Your response defines the outcome. No one can control what happens to them, but we can control how we respond. Whether in personal conflicts, career struggles, or difficult conversations, staying true to yourself, calm, kind, and confident, ensures that you walk away with dignity and strength. At the end of the day, grace, humility, and wisdom will always outshine aggression and cruelty.